Through the shattered window of Schloss Waldstein, Baroness Margarete von Waldstein watched American tanks roll into the valley below. She had been taught to fear this moment, especially the dark-skinned soldiers she'd never seen except in propaganda caricatures. But as the convoy halted and men emerged, her hands trembled not from expected fear, but from a terrible possibility, that everything she'd been told was a lie. The morning of April 23, 1945, arrived with unusual clarity. Margarete stood in what remained of her family's ancestral home, 4 centuries of von Waldstein history contained within limestone walls that had survived the 30 Years' War but barely withstood this one. She was 28 and felt 60. Her husband, Ernst, lay in an unmarked grave near Kursk, dead 2 years. Her father had vanished at Stalingrad. The estate that had sustained 30 families now barely fed 12 remaining staff. Through Ernst's binoculars, she counted the vehicles approaching. 15 tanks, various trucks, jeeps with mounted guns. American flags meant they weren't Soviet, a small mercy. But what struck her immediately was the color of the soldiers' skin. Black men. She had never seen a black person except in propaganda films that depicted primitive caricatures. These men moved with military precision, their uniforms identical to white soldiers she'd seen in newsreels. The propaganda minister's voice echoed in memory. Racially inferior, dangerous, animalistic. But these men looked simply like men. Tired men, far from home, doing their jobs. Baroness? Frau Kusser, the housekeeper, appeared at her shoulder. They're coming. I see them. Margarete descended the grand staircase and stood in the entrance hall, spine straight. Whatever happened, she was still the Baroness von Waldstein. A white American lieutenant emerged from the lead jeep, followed by a translator. Behind them, soldiers spread out, checking the grounds. She opened the door before they could knock. Baroness von Waldstein? The translator asked in heavily accented German. I speak some English, she said carefully. Please, come inside. Lieutenant Hayes's eyes swept the entrance hall, calculating. This property is being requisitioned under authority of the United States Army. You may remain in the Western Wing. The Eastern Wing will be utilized as temporary command post. Understood? Yes. You'll complete denazification questionnaires. All household members. Cooperation is mandatory. I understand. Hayes nodded to his men. Begin inspection. That's when Margarete noticed the sergeant standing near the door. He was black, perhaps 26, with corporal stripes and tank crew armband. He stood quietly observing, his eyes moving across the Baroque ceiling, the damaged chandelier, the family portraits. His gaze was thoughtful, almost scholarly. The inspection took 2 hours. In the great hall, Hayes paused before a 17th century cabinet. Need to check this. Could be rigged. Before the translator could respond, the black sergeant stepped forward. Entschuldigung, he said carefully. Darf ich? She stared. His German was halting but grammatically correct. May I? He approached the cabinet slowly, hands visible. She instinctively stepped back, propaganda images flashing despite her conscious rejection of them. He noticed, paused, met her eyes. There was no hostility, no threat, only weary patience, as if he'd seen this reaction countless times. Es ist sicher, he said quietly. I check for explosives, not to damage. He examined the cabinet methodically, hands precise and respectful of the antique craftsmanship. And then she noticed something that stopped her breath. The scent. Not gunpowder or cordite, not sweat or diesel. He smelled of cinnamon, of nutmeg and cloves. The exact spices her mother had used for Christmas baking before the war, before everything. The scent triggered a memory so sharp it was almost painful. The castle kitchen in December 1938, Frau Kusser preparing Lebkuchen, her mother laughing, the world still intact. How was this possible? The sergeant finished his inspection. Alles klar. All clear, sir. Where'd you learn German, Sergeant Crawford? Hayes asked. Harlem, sir. Mr. Steinberg's tailor shop. He taught me while I worked there. Useful. Hayes turned to Margarete. We establish operations tomorrow. Stay out of the East Wing. As the Americans left, Sergeant Crawford passed close enough that she caught the scent again. He met her eyes briefly, nodded respectfully, said nothing. That night, alone in her chambers, Margarete opened her diary and wrote, They arrived today. Americans. Many soldiers are Negroes, which I had never seen except in propaganda films. I expected monsters. That's what we were taught. But I met a sergeant who speaks German, learned from a Jewish refugee. He treated our antiques with care, and he smells like the spices my mother used at Christmas. Not gunpowder like the others. How is this possible? Everything they told us was a lie. 2 weeks passed in careful coexistence. The Americans established their command post efficiently. Margaret observed from distance. The black soldiers, she noticed, often segregated themselves even within their own unit. They ate separately, bunked separately. She occasionally saw tension with white soldiers from other units passing through. On May 8th, the Americans celebrated wildly. The war in Europe was over. Hitler was dead. Berlin fallen. Wehrmacht surrendered. Margaret watched from her window, feeling nothing. Victory for them meant defeat for her, though she felt no loyalty to what Germany had become. She noticed Sergeant Crawford during the celebration, standing apart from the revelry, smoking, staring at the mountains. His expression was contemplative rather than joyful. The library became her refuge. The Americans rarely used it, but it remained her connection to a Germany that had existed before flags and fanatics. Goethe, Schiller, Kant, Heine. She was reading Rilke when the door opened. Sergeant Crawford stood in the doorway, surprised. Entschuldigung, he said quickly. I did not know someone was here. It's all right, she said in English. The library is for everyone now. He hesitated, then nodded. He selected Faust from the shelf, Goethe's Faust in German, and settled into a chair by the window. Several minutes passed in silence. Finally, curiosity overcame caution. You read Goethe? He looked up, surprised. I try. My German is not perfect. Where did you learn? Mr. Steinberg's shop in Harlem. He left Germany in 1936, saw what was coming. He taught me German while I worked. Taught me about Germany before. He gestured vaguely, encompassing everything. Before us, she finished quietly. I didn't say that. But it's true. A longer silence. She should stop talking. Fraternization was prohibited. But the hunger for real conversation overwhelmed caution. Why Faust? She asked. He considered seriously. Mr. Steinberg said it was about a man who sells his soul for knowledge and power. Seemed relevant. She almost laughed. Yes, very relevant. I wanted to understand what Germany was before it became what we're fighting. Mr. Steinberg talked about Berlin before the Nazis. Music, universities, art. He said it was beautiful once. It was, Margaret said, throat tightening. It truly was. He met her eyes, and something passed between them. Recognition. Two people trapped in circumstances neither chose, both mourning different versions of loss. May I ask, why do you stay here? Alone in this big castle? Where would I go? This is my home. 400 years my family's home. 400 years, he repeated. Hard to imagine. In America 400 years ago, there were no white people where I'm from, just indigenous peoples we drove out or killed. The honesty startled her. You're very direct. War makes you direct. He paused. I shouldn't be talking to you like this. Lieutenant Hayes would have my stripes. I won't tell him. Thank you. He returned to Faust, but after a moment asked, Your husband? The portrait. Wehrmacht officer? Dead. Kursk. 1943. I'm sorry. Are you? Not cruel, simply curious. Yes, I'm sorry whenever anyone dies in war, even the ones shooting at me. He closed the book. I don't hate Germans. I hate Nazis. There's a difference. My husband wasn't a Nazi, she said, never having spoken this aloud. He went because everyone went. By the end, his letters changed. He stopped believing. But by then it was too late. Crawford nodded slowly. Lot of people in that situation. Were you forced to fight? No, I enlisted. 1942. He smiled without humor. Funny thing, I'm fighting for freedom in Europe while my people don't have freedom in half my country. Can't vote in Mississippi. Can't eat in most restaurants. Can't look at a white woman without risking my life. But here I am, liberating Germany. The bitterness was controlled but unmistakable. Margaret had known vaguely that America had racial problems, but hearing it from someone living it was different. Why enlist then? Because Hitler had to be stopped. Because I hoped maybe if we fought, if we proved ourselves, things would change back home. He stood. I should go, but thank you. You can come back, she heard herself say. To the library. Anytime. He studied her face, searching, then nodded. I'd like that. After he left, she remained in the chair, inhaling the lingering scent of spices. She finally understood. He carried something with him. But why? What soldier carried cinnamon to war? The library meetings became regular, though unscheduled. They maintained careful propriety, never arranged encounters, never spoke of them to others. But gradually, they began to talk. She learned he was from New Orleans, moved to Harlem at 17. His father was a Pullman porter. He'd completed 2 years at Xavier University studying literature before the war. I wanted to open a bookstore, he told her. Small place in Harlem. Sell books by Negro authors, classical literature. Give the community access to everything we're told we can't understand. That's beautiful. It's just a dream. Crawford learned about her in fragments. Her education in Munich, studying art history before women were pushed out. Her marriage to Ernst, arranged but affectionate. Her father, a cavalry officer in the First War who'd hated the Nazis but served from traditional duty. I never believed it all, she confessed. The propaganda. But I didn't speak against it, I let it happen. That makes me complicit. You were one person in a dictatorship. So was everyone. That's always the excuse. She closed her book. My husband wrote near the end. From the Eastern Front. He said they were doing terrible things. A month later he was dead. What did he mean? She met his eyes. You've seen the camps. Dachau, Buchenwald. You know what we did. Crawford's expression hardened. Yes, we saw. I didn't know the extent, she said. But I knew Jews were disappearing. We all knew. I had friends from university. They stopped writing. I told myself they'd emigrated. I knew better. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, my grandmother was a slave, born in 1860. She told me stories about masters who considered themselves good Christians while owning human beings, about slavery being defended as natural, ordained by God. He leaned forward. I'm not comparing, but I understand how entire societies convince themselves evil is good. Then what's the point? If humans are capable of such evil repeatedly, what's the point of fighting? Because some people still fight anyway. Because Mr. Steinberg taught me German when he didn't have to. Because you're sitting here admitting complicity instead of denying it. He smiled slightly. That's the point. The small refusals to go along. Before she could respond, footsteps sounded. They immediately fell silent, returning to separate books. Lieutenant Hayes passed without entering, but the moment was broken. After his footsteps faded, Crawford stood. I should go. The spices, Margaret said suddenly. Why? He pulled out a small cloth pouch, faded and much handled. My grandmother gave this to me. Marie Crawford. She worked in a bakery in the French Quarter. Cinnamon, nutmeg, clove. He held it gently. She said, James, you're going to see bitter things. Keep these. So you remember sweetness exists. Margaret's eyes stung. She sounds wise. She survived slavery, Jim Crow, poverty, and still believed in sweetness. He tucked it away. I've carried this through North Africa, Sicily, France, Germany. Every time it gets hard, I open this and remember. May I smell it? He hesitated, then extended the pouch. She took it carefully, inhaled. The scent was powerful. Christmas, childhood, her mother's kitchen, everything lost. Tears spilled over. I'm sorry, she said, returning it quickly. It's all right, I understand. He didn't leave immediately. He stood there holding his grandmother's spices, watching a German aristocrat cry for a world that couldn't be recovered. In that moment, nationality and race and sides dissolved. Same time tomorrow? He asked quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. That night she wrote, He showed me his grandmother's spices today. I cried like a child. He didn't judge. I think I could have loved a man like this in another world. In this world, it's impossible. But knowing such men exist changes something. The following week brought complications. Word spread in the village that the Baroness was speaking privately with a Negro soldier. Old prejudices died slowly. Frau Kusser approached her. Baroness, people are talking. What are they saying? That I've forgotten German honor? Margaret's voice was cold. These same people who cheered Hitler? Who reported their Jewish neighbors? I'll take no lectures on honor from people who have none. Crawford faced his own pressures. One afternoon, Margaret overheard Lieutenant Hayes confronting him. Sergeant, I'm hearing reports you've been fraternizing with the German woman. Sir, we've had brief conversations in the library, discussing literature. You know the policy, and you especially should know better. A Negro soldier and a German woman? Stay away from her. Yes, sir. Margaret avoided the library for 3 days. Better to end this before he faced real consequences. On the 4th day, Crawford appeared at the West Wing door. Baroness, may I speak with you? She received him in the sitting room, maintaining formal distance. Sergeant, you've been avoiding the library. I thought it best. He sat uninvited. I don't care what Hayes thinks. I've spent my whole life being told where I can't go, who I can't talk to. I'm done accepting it. His voice was intense. In America, they'd lynch me for talking to you. But here, in defeated Nazi Germany, I meet someone who treats me like a human being. Someone I can talk to about books and ideas. And I'm supposed to walk away because it makes white men uncomfortable? If they punish you, they've been punishing me my whole life. What are we doing, Sergeant Crawford? I don't know, he admitted. Having conversations, finding something decent in an indecent time. I think it's more than that. He didn't deny it. Yeah, maybe it is. The admission hung between them, dangerous and impossible. I'm a German, she said quietly. The enemy. You're not my enemy. I'm the widow of a Wehrmacht officer. I stood by while my country committed genocide. How can you even stand to look at me? Because you're a human being, Crawford said simply. Complicated, flawed, trying to figure out what's right. That's all any of us are. We can't keep meeting. For my sake? He almost smiled. Let me worry about that. Sergeant James. My name is James. James, she repeated, and it felt intimate. I can't be responsible for what happens to you. You're not. I choose this. He stood. I'm going to the library tonight at 8. Reading Heine. If you happen to be there too, we're just 2 people reading in the same room. At 5 minutes past 8, she entered the library. James sat by the window with Heine's poetry. He looked up, smiled slightly, said nothing. She selected Rilke and sat across from him. They read in silence for an hour. That shared silence contained more meaning than most conversations. The incident happened on a Wednesday. Margaret had gone to the village market when she heard raised voices. Through the crowd, she saw Crawford facing 2 white American soldiers she didn't recognize. They were drunk. Well, look here, one said loudly. Sergeant thinks he's somebody. Crawford's expression was carefully neutral. Gentlemen. Excuse me. He moved to pass. One blocked his path. We're talking to you, boy. Crawford's jaw tightened, but he maintained control. I'm not looking for trouble. Course not. You people never are. A crowd gathered. Margaret saw Crawford's fists clench. She also saw the calculation. If he struck a white soldier, court-martial would be immediate and harsh. She moved before thinking. Sergeant Crawford, I've been looking for you. The lieutenant needs you immediately. All eyes turned. Crawford's expression showed surprise, then warning. Baroness, he said carefully, these gentlemen and I, we're just letting you attend to your duties, she finished with aristocratic authority. The lieutenant was very clear. Immediately. The soldiers wavered. One sneered. Since when do Krauts give orders? Since this Kraut owns the castle where your command post operates, she said coldly. If there's a problem, I'm happy to discuss it with your commanding officer. What are your names and unit? They were clearly AWOL. They backed off, muttering slurs, and staggered away. Crawford remained standing, rigid with controlled anger. You shouldn't have done that. Now they know you. Now you're a target too. I couldn't just watch. This is my fight. I've been fighting it my whole life. Then you shouldn't have to fight it alone. He looked at her, really looked. You don't understand what this means, what they'll say about you. I understand perfectly. I don't care. That evening, Crawford was waiting in the library. We need to talk. I know. This can't continue. They'll come after you now. I can handle it. Can you? His voice was gentle but firm. You don't know what it's like. The whispers, the ostracism. I know it can't exist anyway. Then why? Because it exists now. Right now. And maybe that's enough. She paused. Transfer orders came today. The battalion is being redeployed. The words hit like a physical blow. Where? Can't say. But out of Germany. He paused. 2 weeks. Then we have 2 weeks. To do what? There's no future here. No, she agreed. But there's present. They stood close. closer than propriety allowed, not quite touching. The space between them hummed with everything they couldn't say. "I could love you," James said softly. "In another world." "I think I already do," Margaret whispered. "In this world. Impossible as it is." He closed his eyes. "Don't say that." "Why?" "It's true. Because it makes everything harder." For a moment she thought he might kiss her, but he stepped back. "I can't. If anyone saw, court-martial for me. Worse for you. So what do we do? We have 2 weeks. Let's not waste them." They spent every possible moment in the library those final weeks. James described the bookstore he'd open, the community he'd build. Margaret talked about teaching, passing on knowledge of culture that had been corrupted. One evening, James showed her a photograph, his family. "My grandmother is Marie. She's 79 here. She's the reason I believe in anything good." Margaret studied the dignified woman in the photograph. "She looks remarkable. She told me before I left, don't let them take your humanity. Don't become what you're fighting. That's why I carry the spices." Margaret pulled out her own treasure, Rilke's poetry, leather-bound, inscribed. "This was my grandmother's, Elizabeth von Waldstein, 1892. She showed the inscription. To remember that beauty exists, even when the world seems ugly. It's beautiful. She lived through 2 wars, died just before this one. She believed in culture and art and human potential. Maybe she'd understand that humans are capable of both, beauty and ugliness. The choice we make determines which wins." On the last evening, they met in the library one final time. "I have something for you," James said. He held out the cloth pouch. "I want you to have this." "No, that's yours, your grandmother's. She gave it to me to remember sweetness. Now I'm giving it to you for the same reason." He pressed it into her hand. "You're going to rebuild here. It'll be hard. Open this. Remember sweetness exists." Tears blurred her vision. "I can't take this. That's exactly why you should have it. What will you remember me by? I don't need an object. I'll remember you, the German baroness who treated me like a human being, who chose to be decent when it was dangerous. I have something too." She retrieved the Rilke volume. "Please, take this. My grandmother believed in beauty. Your grandmother believes in sweetness. Maybe that's enough to rebuild." He took the book reverently. "I'll treasure this." They stood facing each other, memorizing details. "In another world," Margaret said, "we could have had something." "In another world," James agreed. "But we had something in this one too. Different, incomplete, but real. Will you write?" He hesitated. "I don't think we should. Letters would just prolong something that can't be." "You're right. But I hate that you're right." They didn't kiss, didn't embrace, but they stood close enough to share breath, and in that moment created something outside all the rules and hatreds and divisions. Safe travels, James Crawford. Safe life, Margareta von Waldstein. The 761st Tank Battalion departed the next morning. Margareta watched from her window as trucks and tanks rolled out. She caught one glimpse of James in a jeep, but whether he looked back she couldn't tell. Life continued. Germany began reconstruction. The castle was returned to her control in 1948. She opened part to displaced persons, then converted it to apartments, generating income to maintain the estate. She never married again. Instead, she taught English and art history, helping a new generation understand the culture their parents' generation had tried to destroy. She kept the spice pouch in her desk drawer. On difficult days, she'd open it, inhale the scent, and remember. Remember that humanity existed. Remember that connection was possible even across seemingly insurmountable divides. In 1978, she read that the 761st Tank Battalion had finally received recognition, a presidential unit citation. More than 30 years late, she cried when she read it. She never learned what happened to James Crawford. The not knowing was its own kind of grief, but she accepted it. Some connections existed in a moment and lived on only in memory. She died in 1998, age 81, peacefully at Schloss Waldstein. Her great-nephews found her diary while settling affairs. The passages about the sergeant who smelled like Christmas fascinated them. One great-nephew, studying history, researched the 761st Tank Battalion. He found rosters, records, archived interviews. Sergeant James Crawford had survived the war, returned to New York, and opened Crawford's Books in Harlem, specializing in African American literature and classical works. He'd been active in the civil rights movement, participated in the March on Washington. He'd married, had 3 children who became educators. He'd died in 1989, age 70. The great-nephew found one more detail. In an oral history interview from the 1980s, James had said, "There was a moment when I met someone who'd been raised to hate people like me. Propaganda had taught them I was subhuman. But when we actually met, talked, shared books, that propaganda dissolved. I realized the most powerful weapon against hatred isn't violence. It's simple human connection. That moment taught me more than the entire war." The interviewer asked if he'd stayed in touch. James smiled. "No. Some connections exist in a moment and live on in memory. That's enough." The great-nephew included this in the castle's archive. Schloss Waldstein, now a museum, created a small exhibit on the American occupation. It included Margaret's diary passages and James Crawford's oral history quote. The exhibit's title, "Connection in the Ruins, A Moment of Humanity in Inhumane Times." In the castle library, 2 items sit side by side. One is Rilke's poetry, inscribed by Elizabeth von Waldstein in 1892. Inside is a second inscription, "To Baroness M. von Waldstein, who chose decency when it was dangerous. May you remember sweetness. James Crawford, May 1945. Next to it is a glass case containing a faded cloth pouch. The label reads, "Spice sachet carried by Sergeant James Crawford, 761st Tank Battalion. Given to Baroness Margaret von Waldstein, May 1945. The scent of cinnamon and clove, a reminder of humanity during occupation." The exhibit's concluding text reads, "This story represents thousands of small moments during occupation, when individual connections challenged ideologies that had led to war." Baroness von Waldstein and Sergeant Crawford never saw each other again after May 1945. Their connection lasted weeks, not years. Yet it changed both fundamentally, proving that even in darkest moments the choice to see each other's humanity matters. These small choices, multiplied across millions, are how societies heal and rebuild. And perhaps that's the point. Not grand gestures, but small choices. The choice to speak when silence is easier. The choice to see an individual rather than a category. The choice to carry sweetness through bitterness. James Crawford carried his grandmother's spices to remember sweetness existed. He gave them to someone who needed the reminder. She kept them until death, a tangible symbol of the moment her certainties dissolved and her humanity expanded. 2 people, shaped by incompatible histories meeting in impossible circumstances, creating a connection that couldn't last but mattered anyway. Not romance exactly, not quite friendship. Something else. Recognition. Mutual witnessing. Proof that propaganda couldn't entirely destroy the human capacity for seeing each other truly. In a world that had industrialized death and weaponized hatred, that capacity, the ability to smell spices and question everything, the willingness to share books across enemy lines, the courage to defend dignity when dangerous, was revolutionary. Margaret paid attention. James paid attention. And in paying attention to each other, they created something that lasted beyond them. A story preserved in diaries and interviews, reminding future generations that connection is possible, even when everything suggests it isn't. The spices still smell faintly of cinnamon decades later, a reminder that sweetness persists even when surrounded by bitterness, that humanity survives even in inhumane times, that the small choice to treat someone with dignity can echo forward through generations. That's the story, not of romance or heroism, but of attention, of paying attention to who people actually are rather than who we're told they are, of choosing, in one small moment, to believe in humanity even when everything argues against it. The war ended, the world rebuilt, the barriers remained, but for a few weeks in a damaged Bavarian castle, 2 impossible people found each other across all those barriers and created something real. Brief, incomplete, impossible to continue, but real. And sometimes in a world of lies and propaganda and industrialized hatred, real is enough. This story reminds us that human connection can bridge any divide. If it resonated with you, Subscribe to keep discovering these hidden moments of history. Like this video if you believe humanity persists even in dark times. And comment below. What moment challenged everything you believed? Let's build a community that remembers. Small connections change everything. Thank you for being here.